Thank you for.
Well, it just makes it sound.
My parents are like kindergarten.
You and I,
Parents are
right?
like,
I would say to my
six.
Hello to my road warriors. Ooh, say that 10 times quickly. I'm proud of you. We shouldn't wait any longer. We need to get started. Tonight, we are going to have a little bit of information about assessments. This is always an area in your projects at the end of the lessons that are a bit weak. And when they come back from technical review, it seems like there's quite a bit of revision that's needed there. So I try to front load it with Assessment 101, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. Very briefly, we're also going to do a review, the 635 homework checklist, which I sent out into your handouts this afternoon, but we'll get to that in a moment. And we'll have time to work with your project director to make certain that you have completed your assignments and that you're rolling. But before we do, let's have some questions for the good of the order. Meredith.
Our question. Good.
Oh, the font. Very good. All righty. I'll start with that. Thank you for bringing it up. I passed out these.
Oh, no.
Oh,
No.
okay.
No. Sorry. So when I do a border online and I take it offline, it's a free one, because I'm cheap.
And it should be. I don't want you paying for anything.
So
Yeah.
I put it in my paper, but when I put it in my paper and I say, okay, put it behind, but my page number is at the bottom, I didn't have a chance to Google, so I'm Googling you.
So
Like,
seriously,
How do I pull the number through? And you're looking like you know.
Taryn would know. Yes.
So you can do a couple of things. You can take a screenshot of the border itself and then put it on the page. Sorry, just a moment.
Oh no, it went down the wrong
Oh.
side. That's okay. Just, you know what?
Ooh, and then send that to the back.
Okay.
Or you can physically put in the page numbers. You can do it.
Oh. So instead of having the page numbers as a footer, have them at the bottom of the page, like where they would be normally? That's what I thought I'd have to do, because these are screenshots.
Yeah,
So
and I will do that on a
image.
lot of my pages.
Yes,
All the way around.
yes,
Okay.
And
absolutely.
then bring the text to front.
Yeah, because on all of it, on each one of them, because it's called creative theft, is what I call it. And so I've done that with all of my borders, and most of them are screenshots, and it won't. So I just need to put them in where they go then on the page and not have a footer. Or would you say put it over top of the footer so I put it in the right spot? Am I making sense?
Yeah, let's look at it afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, because you should be able to send it to the back, and if you can't, then you're gonna have to physically put the text box page number in at the bottom and make sure it's in the same space. Because when I did it with mine, there were many that I had to physically put in, but that was one of the things that came back in edits. It would be like a little bit to the left, and they'll literally like look at your pages and make sure all the numbers line up and make sure all the borders and
Yeah.
things like that, so aesthetically make sure it's in the right spot too.
And it's challenging. It's nice if you can get this resolved now with the page numbers rather than later, because it's really frustrating. But you want to be certain that your pagination matches your table of contents, and that's something we'll work with later on. Very
Well, they're
challenging.
there, you just can't see them.
You got, that is a problem.
Yeah,
Definitely a problem. Thank you, Meredith. We talked about that last week, and we were going to open it up for the good of the order, because page numbers are always quite challenging in such a large document. But remember, the first page, Meredith, hold up your title page. That's page 1, but there's no page number on it. It's counted, but not numbered. And the first numbered page starts on page 2 with this signature page.
Well, I'm good.
So you got it.
I
You
would
got it.
say,
Now the rest of them.
with that, just because at the end of the project, you're gonna end up with lots and lots of page numbers, some of them are gonna have to specifically be written in by hand, highlight them in yellow. So that as you're going through, when you finally get to the end and you're like, okay, I have exactly this number of pages, they're all in yellow, so it's gonna be something you're gonna catch and change when you make those last edits.
Good point. Thank you, good suggestion, Taryn. We appreciate that. And then another thing is, hello, everyone. Glad you're here safely. Sorry.
Almost safely.
There's two right there, so well, three, but used up all of them. Exactly, but yours is white, which is good, Molly, most definitely. Hi, hey Nikki, good to see you. Looking at Meredith's front page, title page, the most important thing is make certain when you use a border, Paulette at Rick's Printing she won't criticize, but she will tell you that you want to be certain that you have enough room for the binder. That's really important, so you need an inch all the way around. Very important. And as you can see, the comb here is going to take up some space with your binder.
But
So
not too much additional space.
Not-
Mine is like a bunch of white on the left, they told me to do additional like,
And it's
space.
too much?
It's too much.
Okay, so you can see how it's formatted here. Most definitely for you at home.
Hold on.
Hello, Madeline, Tim, and Julie. If you can take a look at, this is Corey.
Good one.
It was a good one, thank you. Michael was the project director for Corey, and I'm going to read a couple of her assessments. Corey definitely knew how to assess her students and how to write it up. Obviously, that came from Michael, so I'll give you credit, Michael, most definitely. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah.
Alyssa?
Really fast, and I tried to find it. So I know you're supposed to cite the pictures, of course, as you go, but as far as the title page, the picture that I put on the title page, I don't really want, retrieve from, are you
No.
putting that on a separate?
You can do that, that's how we can work around it.
Okay.
And if you will notice, in the handouts that I sent, we're gonna go through, because I know you were all leaving a little bit early, hopefully, and driving safe up the mountain. But we'll go through the handouts, most definitely. We'll go through the handouts that I sent out this afternoon in an email, and I will elaborate on those. Most specifically, Alyssa, is how to cite an online image. Now, if it is something that you retrieve and it's free, you do still need to cite it. If it's not your own picture, it needs to be cited. So we can work with that by putting it in your resources and references section, which is at the end of the project.
Can you do that with all pictures, or do you always want it right underneath?
You could do that with all your pictures, all your clip art, but if you're using handouts,
That
like
needs
your
to be adapted
worksheets,
from a retreat.
I would
Okay.
definitely, yes, that needs to be cited down on the bottom, but we can kind of tweak it.
Okay.
Most definitely that way. Sounds good. Good question. Thank you, Alyssa. Maureen?
I'm confused if we are expecting our students to do DOKs and if it's SEL.
They don't need to. It was a handout that I sent out to prompt you as a student, Ashley, and each of you, to prompt your thinking to go deeper, not wider. You don't have to include a DOK. Some students do because they're familiar with them and they work with them often, so they want that embedded. It's not a required component, but remember, I said as you look at the wheel, the DOK, the depth of knowledge wheel, there are some great verbs and hints to elicit communication and speaking from each of your students as they're working in small groups or large groups, but great verbs that you can use to begin your lesson, steps to your lessons, steps to engagement. Exactly.
Another question?
Yes, please, Maureen.
Okay, so the student states the standard.
Right.
The objective should not be a repeat, correct me. The objective should not be a repeat of the standard, but an explanation of how that standard, like student will understand phonemes and apply blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
Wanna be sure
Lorraine?
about that.
One of the handouts that I sent out, and we will discuss it, Laureen pretty much created this together. I did a little bit of adaptation for the lesson alignment suggestions, and we'll discuss that as we align standards objectives, and assessments tonight.
I
Yes,
just want to say
Michael?
that Lorraine's question is really a good one, because when the standard is stated and the specific delineation of that particular aspect of the standard, I always look for the connection between the written objective and that standard, and sometimes it's a push
Yeah, it is,
to see
exactly.
where the thing connects, so it's a really good question.
It is, and that's why, it was actually like last spring of 2018 that Laureen pinpointed that. And because there was such a disconnect, Michael, exactly, between standard, objective, and assessment. It all has to align for the outcome of the learning. And so Laureen created that, and then we did a little brainstorming together, and voila, it's one of your handouts, and we'll go over that. Molly?
I just wanted to clarify, last week I know that we had talked about handouts like adapted versus like taken from. Is it okay if we find like the perfect worksheet to cite it and say this is
Retrieved from.
Okay,
You copied and pasted it, that's retrieved.
Okay.
The perfect one, no need to change it. But if you see another one that you feel is, I like it, this part, and this part, but not that part, you adapt it.
Okay.
That's adapted from. And another one of your handouts tonight, you all have good questions that are applicable to the handouts that I sent out early this afternoon, how to cite an online image, be it a YouTube or a video or a handout. Many suggestions, and it will help answer. That's one of the most tricky ones. That's where we get to jump back to our joyous APA. Using APA. Charles?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, he's just stretching. Fixing that. We want you to look nice in class. Thank you. Right. He wasn't what?
he wasn't in the most comfortable car.
Oh, you squished him in a, okay. Yeah.
He was squished.
He was
He
in
was
the trunk.
squished. But you got a ride,
Yeah.
so there you go.
Delightful.
Delightful, delightful. Any other questions? Any other questions? For now, please stop me so that you can be totally familiar with your requirements as we move through. So tonight we'll do Assessment 101, and then we will also do, as I mentioned, the checklist about your homework. I'll have you working with your project director. My goal is to finish this within an hour or less, and then you will have time to work with your project director. That's really important. Okay. So let's start with assessments. This is very interesting to me. Please open your handouts or just view it up here on the screen. This is the PowerPoint, EDUC 635 assessment PowerPoint that I sent out this afternoon. And surprisingly, if you look in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the definition of assessment says to sit beside. And this is exactly what Reggie Routman, a true reading and writing literacy guru, one of my fans, I must say, in terms of, I've read so much of her books and was blessed to be able to see her in conference. She says assessment is defined. The usual meaning of assessment is the collection of data. Of course it is, for your benefit, which then benefits the students. But the term is a derivative of assedere, a Latin word meaning to sit beside someone. And if you truly open up the dictionary, the first meaning of assessment is to sit beside. So what are you doing? You're sitting beside your kiddos, and you are facilitating, you are monitoring, you are evaluating, you are kid watching, you are assessing their work. Moving to the second slide, there are two forms of assessments. One is formative and one is summative. Looking at the left column, formative assessments measure student comprehension in the process of learning a skill or acquiring new knowledge. Here we go, you're sitting beside that student and you are assessing them. It is formative, it is ongoing. It's throughout their learning process. What has the child learned so far? The teacher helps, facilitates, guides the instruction with feedback. And it can be formal or informal assessments. So, informal would be, I'm just monitoring these three. You have to with these three, make certain they have good behavior. But besides that, I'm monitoring Lorraine's writing, Ashley's writing, and Nicole is taking it all in. She's processing it. So, as I'm monitoring them, I am facilitating their learning and maybe saying, Lorraine, you've got an uppercase here where that probably should be a lowercase letter. You know this. We're informally monitoring and giving immediate feedback. Nothing is formal. There is no assessment. It is just on-the-spot feedback for your students. Then, the summative assessment, in contrast, measures the student comprehension of a lesson or a unit at the end of instruction. What did the child learn during or the end of instruction per the test? You've done this, unfortunately. Many standardized tests that we are required, mandated to give in our classrooms are summative. Teacher does not help during the assessment. You can't give them the answers, you can't guide them. The results of the assessment indicate the learning. Unfortunately, teachers are excellent kid watchers, and we, as educators, know our kids so well. And a summative assessment does not give you a true picture of what the child knows. So, in your projects, how does this relate to you? In your projects, you're going to have either a formative assessment or a summative assessment. And it's either going to be, a summative assessment would be at the end of a unit or at the end of a math chapter. These are formative assessments, where it's just kind of like one and done. With the formative assessment, it's ongoing. And I'd like to see that in your projects, how you are monitoring your students. Now, there's a formal assessment, formative assessment, and there's also an informal. A formative assessment that is formal would be, I've noticed Lorena's writing. I've been monitoring her writing, but now she's going to turn in her work, and I'm going to evaluate it. Or possibly turn in maybe some sort of a writing quick pop quiz so that I can evaluate it. It's ongoing, but it's more formal. I'm not just watching her write. I'm evaluating her using an instrument that I've created, some sort of a checklist, some sort of a pop quiz. The informal is just I'm constantly monitoring and sitting beside the students and helping them as they are learning. Laureen.
So the formal assessment I know is that after closure, it's on the very bottom of the lesson. Do you want the students, if they're doing an informal assessment and it's within the lesson itself, should they note that the teacher now does an informal assessment, or do you want that also listed below below assessments? Informal versus formal.
You know what, it's not what I want, it's what, it has to be listed in the assessment portion.
Okay.
But you might, in your lessons, kind of pause and include that.
Okay.
Maybe at this point in time, distribute the multiplication pop quiz.
Should
Ashley?
there be a summative assessment on every lesson?
No, absolutely not. And you may not have summative assessments at all. It may be constant monitoring informally. Brooke, for your professional development project, you're going to check the teacher's progress probably by either their readings and then maybe a reflection or response the next day. So you're kind of constantly monitoring. This is what Jim and I always talk about, Jim, our cameraman, my husband. Our son and daughter-in-law are ultra runners, ultra marathoners. Why, I don't know. But seriously, ooh, I shouldn't have said that on camera. Anyway, they are very involved in a running club, and they run 50, 60 milers. And our daughter-in-law is going to run in San Diego in May, is it? 100 miler. Anyway, so this is the analogy that I want you to hear. Their assessment of themselves to get to the summative end is for them to monitor their health, their progress, their running. It's consistent, and it's sequential, and it's continual. And then at the end is their summative assessment, the run, how they did. But they can't achieve that goal in a summative assessment until they have informally and formally, because they do monitor what they eat and when they work out and how many miles they run, from a formative assessment. Any questions? Yes, Ryan.
I'm also doing a professional development project, I guess, so I was thinking of doing like a, I don't know, like kind of an exit ticket for the teachers that would just be like, you know, this is what I learned and this is what my steps going forward. This is how I'm gonna try to implement it, and then maybe leave a spot for reflecting after. Does that
So,
jive with you?
Scotty, what does Cheryl Watson think of exit tickets? Yeah, right.
Maybe use it one time.
Yes, exactly. I always, Scotty and I always laugh about this. Exit tickets are fine, but enough is enough. I'm sick of seeing exit tickets. You guys can do better than that. And yes, Robert, you can use them. But Scotty, Lorraine, maybe name it something else, but do include maybe different components of it, of that exit ticket, especially with a professional development. I think exit tickets are overused as of currently in our classrooms. So use them occasionally, but I don't want to see an exit ticket for every assessment at the end of every lesson. All right. But I like your idea, Robert, of adding 2 or 3 components to it, especially a reflection component. You can kind of monitor then, you're formally, so to speak, monitoring as you're working with your educators, how they are learning and how much of what you want them to achieve is being retained and cemented to their learning.
What is he doing with the exit tickets? Okay, class, let's
Oh,
do it. An exit ticket, do you put it on the, do you assess it? Do you, what's the purpose of it, and what are you gonna do in the future with that exit ticket?
yes. And that is what we will get to. This is very important, and Scotty is always on top of 3 things. 3 things I want you to remember, and they are, and I want you to write these down for your assessment. We'll get deeper into this, but number 1, in your assessment section at the end of your project, you need to tell us who evaluates. Now, about 98% of the time, it will be the teacher, and you don't need to say the teacher will. It is given in our projects that the reader is a teacher, it's an educator, but sometimes your evaluator may be the students. They may change. It may be an outside resource person that comes in. But as I say, 98% of the time, your evaluator will be you. So, first is the who. If it is students, then state that it's students. If it's not students, it's just the teacher that's reading it, then all you need to say is something like, monitor the students. Number 2 is the how. And I put this in the email, and I'll pull that up in a moment. The how is it evaluated? Robert says an exit ticket. Okay, great. An exit ticket. How is it evaluated? Is it an exit ticket? Is it a rubric? Is it a teacher checklist? Is it review with the students of their portfolio where you're sitting beside them and you're going over their portfolio? The third is what? As Scotty says, what are you going to do with that assessment? How does it influence you as an educator? How does it give you information? Remember, assessment drives instruction. And in the reverse, instruction drives assessment. And that's how all of our goals, all of our standards and our objectives are aligned with each other. So we've got the who, the how, and the what. The what being what is passing and what tool are you using to assess the learning. So what? What are you using? And more importantly, what's passing? Cool, you made this great rubric, rubric for teachers, but what are you going to do with it? And what is passing? So tell us in your assessment section down at the end, 5 out of 7 is passing. 3 or below is reteaching. Something like that.
So if it's SEL, we need to come up with verbiage that explains, I mean, it's probably not gonna be given a number.
No.
But certainly can have an evaluation.
Like 3 out of 5 outbursts is acceptable in the classroom.
Okay.
Something like that.
But, sorry.
No, please elaborate.
What if, what if you're like measuring growth? Like for instance, one of the things I'm measuring is growth of self-perception. That's not necessarily a passing thing. That's like you just want to see, okay, did they score themselves better this time?
And say that.
Okay, but that's fine.
That's absolutely
Okay.
fine, but it is, again, based on your judgment. And maybe you'll have a checklist
Okay.
for some of the emotional behaviors that are learned, contained, kept from being outbursts,
Okay.
in the classroom.
Okay.
I think as you create your lessons and get deeper into them, that will be more understood.
Well, I'll talk about it with Lorraine. Sorry, thank you.
Well, no, we can talk about it after, yeah.
Okay.
But no, tell me a little bit more, because there's others.
Yeah, so a lot of the beginning, because I've just, completed lesson 1 and lesson 2, and both those lessons are contingent to see growth over the next 12 lessons.
Oh, good.
But it's hard to explain, we're keeping this assessment so we can compare it to your final assessment, or, and I think that's where I'm having trouble.
So maybe you would create some sort of a continuum for
Okay.
your students,
Okay.
or something that builds in a portfolio
It should be in note to teacher for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in background.
Okay.
and in background.
Okay.
Exactly.
Sure, we'll talk about it.
What you're looking for,
Okay.
most definitely.
Yep.
But there's many kinds of evaluative tools, more specifically for SEL, that you
Yeah.
might have to be more specific, almost like an IEP.
Mhm.
Think about an IEP, how you write that up,
Okay,
and go from that.
okay. Okay.
Okay, good, all righty. So, 1 is the who, 2 is the how, 3 is the what. Passing, you've got to tell us what constitutes success. What is passing? Then, formative versus summative. Formative, on the left, a daily assessment. It's linked to learning experience. You assess student understanding and mastery of skills, and your data is used to modify instruction, which means assessment drives instruction. Summative, end of the year, lesson, unit, year-end assessment, state assessments, unfortunately, that we are all mandated for, aligned to area content standards, and the components sometimes, unfortunately, in some school districts, of teacher accountability and evaluations, like your AYPs that are in California, unfortunately. So that is what you're going to include in your lesson plans. You don't always have to have formative and summative. Probably most of your lessons will be summative assessments. Most of them. No, Molly, yours aren't?
Well, there should be.
What did I say, formative? Thank you. Yay! First mistake I ever made. That was assessment.
You know what it was.
Blah, blah, blah. I understand that. Molly thinks she's listening. I saw she was listening. Thank you, Molly. Most of them will be formative. And most of them will be somewhat informal because you'll be kid watching, you'll be monitoring your students. But if you do have a big unit, consider creating some sort of a final summative evaluative assessment. All righty? Alyssa.
As far as the what, when you say what, I see that you're actually just about to start to talk about that. But is that something as simple as if they are, classified as remediation or something, this could be something you could do with these kids, something as simple as a statement as, oh, you can't master this, here's an activity that you could do?
Right.
Is that something as simple as what you're looking for?
Less than a whole sentence,
Okay.
literally, right.
Okay.
Reteach using handout B.
Got it, okay.
Something like that, exactly. Then, in closing, assessment drives instruction. Summarize, interpret our data by bringing meaning to our assessment, evaluating it to the level of evaluation. Assessment must promote learning, not just measure it. So, learning and relearning and reteaching. Per Reggie Routman in 2000, purposeful assessment tasks promote high-level thinking, problem-solving, and performance, both on the spot and over time. So again, somewhat of a continuum. Most important of your assessment section, who will evaluate the learning and how, and what is mastery? Tell us what it will take for you to not have to reteach. Don't just list what the student is doing again, and this is what everyone does. Often, our project directors are shaking their heads. I open up your assessment and you say the student will complete worksheet C on multiplication tables. I know that, that's already in your steps to lesson. I want to know, how are you going to evaluate that multiplication handout, and what will it take for them to pass? 90 out of 100, is that passing? For example, Scotty.
Through a rubric,
Pardon?
by use of a rubric.
Exactly. You need to tell us what you're using to evaluate their mastery. So, for example, take a look at what I sent you, because I know you probably did not have time to read it in detail. So, examples of assessments. A formative assessment, and here's the who, the how, and the what. So the first one is monitor the classroom during group discussions, providing feedback as needed. That's somewhat informal, obviously. How? Following group presentations, students will be evaluated per the presentation rubric. Notice that I put the word presentation rubric in italics to note or differentiate that specific handout. And keep this in mind, when you're writing your projects, it's always best to either put it in a different color, a different font, italicize it so that it stands out and it's not lost in just the normal font. So, the presentation rubric That's a formal evaluation piece. Mastery of presentation skills is 5 out of 7 per the presentation rubric. So you've circled it, and you're expecting 5 out of 7 or whatever you determine. Then let's take a look at let's take a look at then I went too far. Formal, and then the informal. The informal is the who, the how, and the what. Monitor the classroom during small group discussions, providing feedback as needed. Who's evaluating here? Who?
Teacher.
The teacher. It's a given, so you don't need to say the teacher will. Too wordy. How and what? Evaluate student performance via teacher observation. So that's how you're doing it. Use the teacher, for example, the teacher multiplication checklist to determine learning or whether modification and or teaching is necessary. So your teacher multiplication checklist is going to tell us what is mastery. Lorraine.
Okay, so bless your hearts, this is a question you get to hear from the expert.
No.
Yeah. All right, so monitor the classroom during small group discussion. I'm assuming that back in the lesson, the project needs to know what we're discussing.
Right.
Okay. So you can't just say,
Have a discussion.
Yeah, no, you can't. It's all, this is a summation, not summative, it's just a summation, like closing of your lesson, of what the steps to the lessons were, what has gone on in the lesson. And now we're ending it with monitoring those classroom during small group discussions. This whole lesson was about small group work and discussion together.
but in the lesson, that discussion, I need to know what that is. What are
Exactly.
you expecting the students to discuss? And what are
Exactly.
you expecting them to come up with?
That's in the steps to the lesson.
Good.
Michael,
Would you agree that in some cases where mastery is not attained, and a specific statement has to be made about what the next step is
yes,
because it was not attained, would you agree that that sometimes will be exactly what the differentiation statement is?
It-
Not always necessarily.
not always, but yes, I do agree.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I only heard half. What were you asking?
Okay, when
Say
the
again?
student does not achieve mastery,
Yes.
and we want to know what the teacher is going to do, in some cases, your differentiation
Oh,
statement
okay, that's what you
may be
Yeah.
what you're going to do for that student.
Okay.
But not in all cases, because
Not in all.
differentiation takes on kind of a different meaning.
Exactly.
Thank you. I didn't hear your question.
Exactly. Thank you, Meredith, for clarifying that also. So, let's take a look at, I'm just going to pull up the second handout. It's just what's the difference between formative and summative, and you can basically read over this, just more information. If you're really clear, then you can skim over it. If you really are concerned, then read it and digest it and internalize it to cement your learning. Alrighty. Then, the next handout that I wanted to go over, but first, are there any more questions about assessments? Any more questions?
Do you want it to be that exact who, how, what? Do you want it, is that the best way to just format it that way?
And you know what? Think about it this way. Yes, my answer is yes. But use the who, the what, and the how as almost an IPQP. Remember we did those back in 628 to be certain that your topic was viable and you could create lessons in 635. So apply those three to your assessment and just mentally say, yep, I got the who, I got the what, and I got the how. I got it in there, exactly. You can create it however you want, but with that said, we want it to be your work, but again, it aligns to the standards, your objective, and then the assessment. So for example, this is Corey's, and her project was art integration, an instructional guide for teachers to integrate visual arts and physical science for grades 3 to 5. So she was integrating art into the sciences, physical science specifically. And I did want to share with you another option to your creativity, and Taryn did this also with her project, is a jump drive. So that if there's anything that you want to add to your project, but you're running out of room here, or you want to make kind of a resource with all your handouts, because you have quite a few handouts, put them on the jump drive so that they could be inserted, obviously, and just copied in total from the jump drive without having to pull them out of here.
Put it on the website.
Oh, yes, definitely. And Taryn's project, along with other projects, because they created a website, their website was also on the jump drive. Taryn, would you like to elaborate on that?
Sure. My project was a little different because it was citizen science, so it's public participation in science, and so the students were the public that were participating. So I had a website, and I also had an app, so they could like go outside and you know, monitor and record all their observations, and then we could come back and they could, you know, put it on the website if they wanted to. But also the teachers could go on the website and, you know, set it up so that they could, like, hey, we have this citizen science project happening in this neighborhood, would anyone, you know, like to be a part of this? And then you could share it with scientists, or you could share it with other people that wanted to get involved in it. So that was a little bit different, like that aspect of it. But then I put all the resources, so like the major articles and research, if people wanted like to read that for buy-in, and then all of the templates for like how to plan and how to organize all of this. And then at the end, like how to evaluate it, not just your students, but also like the participation and, you know, like how much progress your students and you made towards that scientist's goal at the end as well. So just lots of extra documents that needed to go on there.
But the ability to, with this jump drive, the ability then to use the apps and immediately log on, so to speak.
Yeah, all the info is on there.
Exactly.
So, Taryn, was there a certain site that you used? Was it the Google Drive, or was it a certain like platform that
I
you
used
used?
Wix for that.
Okay, so you did use
Yeah,
Wix.
and I ended up, just because I had so many people that ended up using it, I bought the domain name, but they
Okay.
have a free version of it. And
Yeah, no,
that
I've
was
used
great.
Wix, I just
Yeah.
didn't know if you used any kind of.
Yeah, I like Wix. It was good. And it's pretty. They have like floating
It is.
backgrounds and things. Which
It is pretty mobile. It is
So we
pretty.
can be really
It's
creative.
pretty.
Good, thank you. So, thank you, Taryn. So here is the assessment. One of the assessments from one of Corey's lessons, which was circuit sculptures. Only Taryn and you scientists would understand this. Creating circuit sculptures. Her objective was students will be able to apply scientific ideas to design, test, and refine an artistic sculpture that converts stored chemical energy to light energy using electricity. So here are a few pictures. So they created some sort of an art sculpture. Here we go. Kind of a funny little creation for those of you at home. And it created then electrical energy. Her assessment then was, formative assessments will occur through initial reviews, teacher monitoring, and student progress logs that can be reviewed as the project progresses. So, a progress log, which could be used also for SEL, like a continuum. The summative assessment will be conducted at the end of the unit in the form of an interactive presentation using the circuit sculpture exhibition rubric. Ah. The circuit sculpture exhibition rubric. So that is the exact title of the rubric, which needs to be in the assessment, and it is italicized. That rubric then tells us exactly what is passing.
And in the materials too.
And in the materials, exactly, Scotty. In her materials list, that circuit rubric is listed in the materials, most definitely. And when you're making your materials list, seriously consider making your handouts or rubrics, putting them in italics, or as I said, in a different color or a different font, just to make them stand out. Lorraine.
And please be sure that when you have your handouts throughout your lessons, you're busy creating them, you're busy creating the lesson, and all of a sudden, the titles start to change.
Yeah.
And so you really want to be sure that your titles are consistent, both in the lesson, on the rubric itself, in your resources. And if you really can do this, as the worksheets or whatever appear in your lesson, have them in order behind the lesson, so the teacher doesn't have to flip through and try to find which rubric you're talking about or which worksheet you're talking about. Thank you.
Most specifically is, and we're jumping then to your lesson. If your second bullet tells the students to use handout A, make certain that handout A appears first in a compilation of handouts at the back of your lesson. Okay, so just keep in mind that with self-assessment, formative, informal assessments, that you're selecting work that you're evaluating, and you can use, I made a list here, portfolios, noting strategies in a checklist. You're evaluating work against a rubric. You're using a report card. The students then could self-assess using a report card on themselves. And remember, the most important thing, if you do have those few students during those times that those few students or your whole class self-assess themselves, make certain that you teach that self-assessment. Model it and teach it. It must be taught. And I learned this from my very wise husband. If you want it, you've got to teach it. If you want it. If you want the learning to happen, you've got to model it. Am I correct?
Fred Jones.
Fred Jones, exactly. An excellent practitioner of behavior and discipline. Kind of back in our day, but excellent. Absolutely. Behaviorist. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to jump to is just the handouts that I sent to you, and this is self-explanatory. I couldn't spell it out easier for you, how to cite online sources. So, how do you cite YouTube? How do you cite an online image? How do you cite a website? Then the second page, further. Remember, you don't need to cite clip art from Microsoft Word, but if you retrieve an image from Google Images or some other online source, you must give credit. And this is how you give credit. And again, you don't necessarily have to put retrieve from right under your big beautiful picture on the front title page of your project. You can put it in the back. And you might say, page 1, clip art retrieved from, or the big blue boat picture, page 6, retrieved from. You can do that if you so choose, but it must be cited. And again, we are relying on your professionalism and your honesty in that if you do retrieve something, copy and paste and put it in your project, that you cite it somewhere in the project. Most important, know that your project director is going to find it in turnitin.com. If you're alluding to the fact that it's your own creation, If there's no citation for it, then we assume it's your own creation. We're assuming your honesty and your professionalism. But unfortunately, it could be found when the instructor turns it to turnitin.com. And for Christina and Lynn, those of you that are new, those two of you that are new to Turnitin, Christina, have you used it?
Yeah.
Yes, you have. Okay, great. So then you'll want to create an account for Brooke
Yeah.
to turn it in. Yes.
I have one
And
case,
Lynn, I'll get with you.
I have one case where I'm using an online tool,
Uh-huh.
and so I'm using the online tool to do an end of lesson kind of self-assessment. And so I took a screenshot
Okay.
of the tool. Should I caption that with like retrieved from? Is that something you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's almost easier to put it right below the
Yes,
picture.
that's fine.
But if you don't, and you don't want to mess up the look and the design, then put it in your resources and references.
No problem. That was an interesting one that came up where I was like, technically I created like the questions, but the actual like look of the
picture,
picture is not necessarily my own, so.
that's your image.
Yeah,
That's the image that we're talking about.
yeah, okay, cool.
Good. Okay, and then, let's move to the third page. And this was something that I copied from apastyle.org. Remember I said that that's an excellent resource back in 628. And this helps if you're trying to cite something and it's hard to see, but you can see it on your screen. If something's missing and you're trying to cite it, it says to the very left up here, it says, what's missing? Nothing, I've got all the pieces. So the solution, you know how to do it. Here's all the elements you need to cite your image. Now, what if the author is missing? Then it tells you how to write it out. What if the date is missing? And you know that from 628 annotations, ND for no date. What if the title is missing, and so on? Author and date are both missing. These are just more handy-dandy tools for you to make certain that you have cited correctly in your work. So citing from a website for references, we need to know the who, which is the author, the when, which is the date, the what is the title of the document, and the where the link came from, you'll say retrieved from. Okay, what I'd like to do, this was just a really quick overview. This is for your information and for you to read. I did the very last one I did send you was about the lesson alignment suggestions, and this goes with our assessments. And you can read this, but basically this was, with the help of Laureen, a document that we created in terms of aligning the standards to the objectives, and then a DOK if you choose to use it, but it is something for you to have in your background knowledge. And then your connection to prior learning, questions. If you're asking questions, use that DOK wheel to ask good questions that are embedded in your lessons. And then ending with the assessments. Now, what I'd like to do is take just a couple of minutes, and I'd like you to, we're going to take about 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to give you time to work with your project director. I want each of you to take a look at the lessons that you have, and I want you and your project director to take that one lesson or the second one, whichever one you want, and I want you to create an assessment. Take 2 to 5 minutes on it and create an assessment, and we'll share a few of them when we are done, okay? Alrighty, we're going to turn off the camera now. So, questions about assessments. As you begin to create them, hopefully it will come to you much easier. And please know that they don't have to be long dialogues. A couple of sentences at the most. Be specific. Don't be too wordy. And as Taryn said, do we have to list exactly how you're going to reteach it? No, you don't. You might include it, as Michael said, in differentiation to achieve your goal. Give an idea there. But you don't have to specifically say, this is what reteaching will be. Use this, this, and this. But a strategy. No, you don't need to create another rubric. Absolutely not. They've either mastered it or not. And that assessment is driving re-instruction, if you want to put it that way. Taryn?
And then for modeling, so we wrote out like a whole couple of sentences now on how that should be modeled. Should that go just right above, like within that final assessment box? So it's there, or do you want that to be a part of that lesson, like model
The modeling
this?
of the assessment, or?
Yeah, so I think maybe, can she give you an example?
Please do.
And
Molly,
make
let's
more
hear
sense of
yours.
context.
Okay, so for this lesson, they're learning about what it means to be a scientist. And
Okay.
so they're drawing pictures of themselves as a scientist,
Mhm.
and then they're going to get up and they're going to share it, and they're going to share one way that they are a scientist. But like we were talking, if you want a behavior, you need to teach it.
Got
So should we include that in both the lesson and the assessment box, or just the lesson, or just the assessment box?
It has to be in the lesson.
Yeah, it's in the
Okay.
lesson. It's embedded in the lesson. Again, you don't want to get too wordy. Just go with those 3 key points of your assessment. Did you complete one, Molly? Would you read it to us? Do you feel comfortable doing that?
The modeling piece?
No, the assessment.
No.
Okay.
We're working, we're almost there.
Okay, they're gonna pass, all righty. Alyssa, who else is volunteering? Anyone volunteering to hear their assessment? Meredith, read yours.
Alright. I gotta find it.
Please, already, oh, it was on the back.
Do you want, so,
Just read the first part and then we can.
yeah, I'll just pull, there's the assessment sheet.
So Meredith created a tool to use to check students' knowledge of upper and lower case
So
letters.
with the kindergarten, one of the first assessments they have to know is like their letters, their sounds, right? So we did the who was using the child watching tracking sheet that we have, individually evaluate each child's ability to name the letter and make the sound of each capital and lowercase letter. Per the assessment popcorn sheet and tracking sheet that we have, mastery of all 26 letters and sounds, upper and lower case in parentheses. And I'm pretty sure it's by December that they have to know all 26 of the kinder year, depending on where they are. So the who, the what, tools, and then how much. And I just have to tweak them a little bit, but
Right, but we got the 3 components included in an assessment down on paper.
did you say not to include what those summative assessment standards were there, since I'd already have them
Right,
somewhere else?
good point. What Meredith did was she included the standard again in her assessment. She didn't have to, but what you can do is take that standard and turn it into an assessment.
Okay.
Kind of look at, students will know 26 letters by the end of kindergarten.
Yeah.
And so turn that around and restate it in your assessment.
Okay.
Okay, all righty. Enough on assessments. Our last task this evening, which you will work on with your project director, and the rest of our class time will be with your project director, is the EDUC homework checklist. I sent this in your handouts this afternoon, but I'm giving you a hard copy. This is for the homework that was due tonight. And please check it off and sign it, both of you. And before you leave tonight, I need to have this. This is just our way to monitor and make certain you are on track. Be honest, my friends, be honest. For those of you at home, I look forward to any questions you may have and any progress that you've made or you have not made. Please give me a call or an email or a text and we will progress further and keep you on track. Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much. Good night.